Animator and director Joanna Romersa got into animation because she got onto a bus. When Miss Romersa was in college, she visited a girlfriend who worked at Walt Disney Productions, but it was a close thing. The transit system from Pasadena to Burbank was zigzag and required a lot of transfers, and midway through clambering on and off of buses and trolleys, Joanna almost missed a connection. She relates that if she hadn't gotten on that last bus, she never would have made it to Disney's and would have ended up a nurse or a teacher instead of an animator. But she did get to Disney's and was enchanted with the lot and what the employees there did on it. And a few weeks later, when she had an opportunity to train as an inker in the ink and paint department, she took it. During her long career, Miss Romersa has worked on Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and a long string of commercials, classic television shows, and direct-to-video animated features. One of the few women to make the switch from the ink and paint department, where she was an inker, to animation and direction, Joanna Romersa today works at Walt Disney Television Animation, where she serves as a timing director on TVA's upcoming The 7Ds. We spoke at the Animation Guild on March 28, 2014. We're talking today to Joanna Romersa, and the question that I have for you is, to start things rolling, is how did you make your way into the animation industry to begin with? Because I've talked to people who say they started being interested in it when they were 5 years old and they did nothing but draw and blah and blah. But you have a different story altogether. And when we were talking over lunch, talk a little bit about the day that you actually stepped into animation or went down that route.
Yeah, I had absolutely no intention of animation, really of art. Even though I had done a lot of drawing in the past, because my mother was a Bible teacher and she used to cart me along with her, and she would say, sit down and draw, and I would draw. But I didn't really draw, but I could draw. So
Right.
when I was asked to go to the studio as a tour, a friend of mine who worked
And the studio being Disney.
Disney, on a tour, she would take me, she was the secretary there, and so I did go to the studio, and
But how was the process of getting over there? You thought, this
well,
isn't for me.
I didn't have a car, so I had to take a bus downtown to Pasadena and walk over and get the red car and take the red car to LA and then a bus back to the valley, because there was not a
Direct connection.
And I missed the first car, so I walked back to get the bus, and the bus came and the doors opened, and I thought, okay, I have nothing else to do, I'll go. So I got on the bus, did the trip.
But it was a near thing.
I didn't really particularly want to go.
Right.
But when I got to the studio, I mean, it was so amazing. And it was magical. I mean, it just the very thought of all they were doing. And they were working on Lady and the Tramp. And so I went home and got some of my drawings that I had done, and life drawings, and made an inked squiggle so they could see I could do a line, and they hired me as an inker.
And that was the next week.
It was the next week.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
when you went to take the tour and you thought, I'm going to try working here, or was it simply that
I hadn't.
by the time you got through walking around, you thought, I'd like to work here?
Yeah,
So it was a process of being there,
it was being there. And I saw Tony.
and you saw your future husband.
That's right.
And you thought, I've got to be back in this proximity. So, all right, so you come back and you start training to be an inker. And how was that whole process, and how much work did you do on Lady and the Tramp? Because you did do might have been a little bit of work on that. I mean, it's not like you worked there for the whole picture, but how much do you think you did?
Well, because I really couldn't ink in those early days, because it takes, little skill. And so I inked the smoke in when the photographer takes the picture of the family.
Yeah.
And the cabbages and the barrels when Tramp was running through. And it was very different, and it was boring, and I really didn't particularly want to be there, and because I wanted to do more. And Jeannie Kyle made me sit down, and she said, learn this and you'll have a job for the rest of your life. Little did I know. It was
She was right.
So true. Bless her heart. But it's been great. I love it. I love the business. I've seen it change. And what else could I have done?
Because that first year was 1954, and then talk about when you tried to get into animation in betweening at Disney's. How did that happen?
I went to, and I think his name was Hanson, but I wasn't sure, and he told me no, that because it took 5 years to become a good animator, and it would take 5 years of their time to really train me, that it wasn't worth it to them because I would get married and have babies and go away and never come back. And that was it.
So no, we're not training you to do this. We're not even going to look at your portfolio.
No.
Thank you, but move on. Well, that was what, 1955?
1955, right. The beginning of 55.
Yeah.
Because I was just there for a short time, and I realized that I wanted to do more, even though inking was a challenge. And they told me I could be a checker because they hired women as checkers, but I couldn't be an in-betweener.
And you couldn't get on the animation track.
No.
Yeah. I know that was kind of the drill in the 30s and the 40s, but even into the 50s it was part of the studio culture.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're an inker, and you stay in the inking line for quite a little while. Then you come back and work on Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm. Just for a few months on Sleeping Beauty, and then I did quit because I did have a child at that time. And then I worked for Earl Thompson, and we inked on a lot of the old wonderful television commercials and series, Beanie and Cecil, the J. Ward productions. We did some great stuff. The J. Ward production where that goes blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I inked that. And Bob Clampett's studio and UPA, a lot of UPA work.
Yeah, and commercials as well.
All commercials.
What were some of the? Those are all the characters that were coming out of those studios for commercials.
Right. The Western Airline commercial
Oh,
with
yeah.
the bird. We works on some of the. One of the first that they did was Bank of America commercial.
Oh, yeah.
The guy was conducting. I inked that.
They were a lot of traditionally animated commercials in the early 60s
Right.
and middle 60s. So the inking career lasted until the late 60s, you told me. And then you moved. How did you move from inking into animation? What was the prompt there?
Well, I met Art Babbitt when I was at Earl Thompson, and he taught me how to ink in between. And then I was working for Bernie Wolf, and they needed in-betweens on a weekend done, and I said I could do it, and I didn't know whether I could do it or not. And I took it home, and I did. I did it.
And they were well satisfied?
They were satisfied, and I stayed then on until Bernie Wolf closed up and was assisting, in-betweening.
Right.
And then I went to back to Hanna-Barbera, and
And you've been in and out of Hanna-Barbera earlier on, and
I was an inker at Hanna-Barbera.
Oh, I see.
Inked on A Man Called Flintstone was the first and the original Johnny Quest, and did all the brush inking because Oral had taught me how to do the brush inking for commercials, and we did that on Johnny Quest, and that was
Oh,
great.
okay.
It was great. I loved it. And when inking was an art, it was wonderful. I enjoyed it. But then when the machines came in, the Xerox machines, and
Cuts the inkers out pretty much
that's right.
completely.
So those of us who could draw went into in-betweening, and those that didn't stayed in the Xerox
So
department.
you did a little bit of in-betweening in the commercial area, and then you moved over to Hanna-Barbera?
And then I was back at Hanna-Barbera because I really didn't get a break at Hanna-Barbera for a long time until then when the machines came in and all we did was ink mouths on Xerox, on the Xerox cell.
Right. And the rest of the character was just a
It was all
Xerox line.
it was all Xerox,
And the mouth
so
was
then
inked.
we made the transition, and then I was able to be an in-betweener and an assistant, and then an animator.
And what was your first long-term experience was at Hanna-Barbera, in-betweening and then working up. How did you go from in-betweening and ramp up into animation from the career? And by that, what I mean is, you were telling me that you were in a room with 3 other male animators, and you started working on projects as an animator, and they gave you pointers. So talk about that.
Bill Shippick told me that if I would work for Hugh Fraser, because Hugh Fraser assistants didn't want to work for him because it was too hard to follow, and he said if I would work with him for a year that he would make me an animator. So I took him up on it, and it was wonderful education because Hugh just did a lot of straight ahead animation. In those days, the most of it was pose to pose and in betweens, and but Hugh just straight ahead animated, and sometimes I learned very quickly that when he gave me a scene, I would flip it and I would place it down because many times he would forget to number those drawings. So I didn't want to get them out of place.
Get them out of order, and you're
Out of
dead.
order, because then I was dead. And many times he would write on the exposure sheet the numbers and the way it was supposed to go. But again, this is all straight ahead animation.
Right.
So I had to learn to expose it, and I had to do camera moves, and because he was a wonderful artist. But at Disney, they had a department that did all the mechanics for the animators, and that's the way they worked. But with limited animation, it was all planned. But Hugh Fraser, bless his heart,
Didn't like the planning so much.
didn't do the planning. He just did it. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely great. What a wonderful man he was. So I learned, and I did, and indeed, Bill Shippick made me an animator on,
As he promised.
as he promised, on Inch High Private Eye. And Jerry Hathcock was my supervisor and again taught me a lot. He was the first person I ever knew that just called it an overshoot. And of course now with the overseas productions, we call for that all the time, the overshoot and settle back, overshoot and settle back. And Jerry Hathcock taught me that.
Taught you how to do it right here in Southern California.
In Hanna-Barbera with limited animation, but a lot of it was not limited because a lot of those animators were wonderful animators from Disney. And yes, it was limited, but they were masters, and it was terrific
And they
experience.
knew how to do it.
Yeah.
So you're animating, and after, what shows did you animate on, and then you became the supervisor for the assistants? How did that transition come about?
We were animating on Smurfs, and that really is an interesting story, but we won't talk about that. How I actually became in charge of the assistants, and
You don't want to talk about it?
well, yeah. Well, actually, the fellow
us
who
the
was in
edit.
charge was fired.
Yeah.
And you probably, and go back through the union notes, you'll see that he was fired for reasons.
Oh.
No, not that. But anyway.
Other reasons. Oh, well, that happened all the time.
Anyway, Jane Barbera hired me to be in charge, and she then thought maybe I couldn't do it, and Vicky Casper said no, give her a chance, because she thought I would be too soft on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But
They wanted some hard fanning,
they
too.
wanted tough.
Wow.
But anyway, I was fortunate, and that was a good experience too. And I was in charge of the assistants for quite a few years, 5, 6, 7 years, I remember. But that was an education too, because I got to flip all the scenes that came in, and who did what, and there were 96 assistants when I first took over that department, and then of course we dwindled down to
Just a
9.
few.
Yeah, it was. Those were hard days.
Because
when
they were
the-
shipping more and more of the work overseas.
more overseas, and it was the beginning of the end for the work.
Television animation
Yeah.
in the LA area. That's basically when they shipped everything out.
Yeah, the studio in Australia was the first, and then Taipei, and then the Philippines,
Korea,
Korea, Japan, the world. Yeah,
it all went
India.
away.
India. Yeah.
So after 6 years, you're not the supervisor of the assistants because there are no assistants to supervise. That's pretty much
Yeah.
it, right?
That's it.
And then where did your career go? We're talking, by now we're into the 1970s, middle 70s.
Yeah, 80s.
The
80s.
1980s.
Yeah. Then we started writing sheets, and we wrote sheets, and we did the timing, and then slugging,
Yeah.
and then that was it. And what can I say?
Now, I want to double back here. You spent your opening years at Disney, and you spent a big part of your career at Hanna-Barbera, and then you've now sort of doubled back to Disney, although it's a totally different Disney. I wanted to compare and contrast those different studios at different times. When you started at Disney in 1954, what was going on the lot? Because you were telling me about this, it was mainly just the buildings and one soundstage, and they were putting together something for an amusement park, and so talk
Yeah.
about that.
It was like being back in school almost for me, because it was so fun. Of course, I was young, and we had dances at noontime on the soundstage, and the guys played ping pong and baseball, and they had a basketball team, and it was just fun. It was really fun. The buildings, the old buildings were there. The theater, the place now which is the store, was where we would have to
Sure.
clock in, because men would run like crazy to get in there, because they would dock you. If you were late for 5 minutes, they would dock you. And the trees were short, and when I went back years later, the trees were all tall.
They were like redwoods.
It was redwoods in comparison to what they were. But when you're on those inner streets, it's just like it was.
Yeah, and the
Just like
buildings
it
are all
was.
still there.
It just was.
But you were talking about they were mocking up rides for
Oh, for Disneyland, yeah, they had the Mr. Toad ride on the back lot. set up like a cheap carnival. And we walked through as ink and paint girls, and the things would flop down and everything. And it was like, who would ever have, could have imagined a Disneyland from that Mr. Toad ride? And
But they did.
they did. I was there on
And Mr.
opening
Toad
day,
is still there,
and he's still there.
60
Get
years later.
revised.
So that was Disney's in 1954. Now, what was Hanna-Barbera? Because you were in and out of Hanna-Barbera in its early days and its middle years.
62. They had just moved to the main building there.
On Cahuenga.
And again, I worked at home a lot in those days because I had small kids. And I worked on all those wonderful early shows.
And you were inking on
I was
those.
inking.
You were inking in those days. What was Hanna-Barbera like compared to Disney? Much more factory-like, business-like?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. Totally a factory. What was it like? It was fun, and it was every day was different, and every year was different, and it kept it exciting to me because there were challenges.
And it was faster moving probably than Disney.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
No ball teams and no.
Oh no, it was all.
No dances
Oh
at
yeah,
lunch.
they did have a ball team too. Come to think of it, they had a baseball team.
Really?
But
They had a basketball team too.
it was Bill Hanna ran that thing with a tight ship, and he wasn't always easy to get along with, but he did it. And then I think back, the combination of the two, of Joe and Bill, and how well they worked, and what a gold mine it was. And considering that those, if we only had residuals for all those years, I wouldn't
We'd
still
all be
working.
independently wealthy.
I wouldn't be working, but it was great. What can I say?
And you're back at the Disney of today, and what's that like? What's working at Disney Television Animation compared to Disney from 1954, 55?
Oh well, technology, the computer, the Cintiqs, the animation is always animation, and it's full, it's limited, it's modern, it's Japanese look or the anime look, but animation is always, it's different, but it's all the same, and motion is the same. And as far as stories, and story is the root of any good success. If you don't have a story, what have you got? And it can be pretty and it can move, but unless it's really a good story, you just have motion.
It's not going to cut it.
It's not going to make it. How is it different? I think there's still a quality to Disney that always has been, and that we always strive for. However, I mean, look at the beautiful stuff that comes out from other places these days.
Yeah.
But it is different. And I think the computers and I, because I'm an old lady and I'm happy to get up and go talk to somebody as opposed to doing an email to someone.
Yeah.
It always bugs me when we have to do so much on the computer because I really don't like it. But it is a wonderful tool, and look at how they can layer things, and it can make it better.
Yeah.
And just coming down here today, in the hallway they show the shows, and they had Jake and the Pirates on, and even though that's hand drawn, and I'm looking at it, and the eyeballs don't. Oh, cell phone! I forgot about that. That's my purse ringing. Sorry.
This again. All right. So we're back doing it. So the technology has changed quite a bit. In terms of women in animation, you're one of the pioneers. There were women in animation before you got into it, but they were mainly relegated to ink and paint, and that isn't true anymore. But since your career has really spanned decades, what was the role of women like in animation in the 50s and 60s? What was your direct experience, and then what do you see around you today?
There's no comparison. I mean, because we were the ink and paint girls, and that was our place. There were a few women that got into animation, but not very many.
Yeah.
Where now you just work hard and you can get there. And encouragement to anybody, whether male or female, if you want it, go for it, and work hard, and 9 times out of 10 you'll succeed.
You'll get there.
You'll get there.
Do you see fewer barriers for women now?
No. No.
Or do you
no.
see about the same number of barriers now as back in the day in like 1954, 55?
Oh, no comparison. There were literal barriers. In fact, I used to have a Xerox copy of a letter that somebody had sent to a woman who had inquired at Disney, and it said, "No, we do not hire women."
Oh yeah.
I've
seen that letter.
Have you seen it? I don't know. Yeah, but
It goes back to the 30s, but your experience in 1955 was kind of similar.
Absolutely. And if I hadn't been tenacious, I probably would have gone by the wayside and just forgot about it.
Really? Mm-hmm. It was the stick-to-itiveness.
It was hard. It was really hard, and even at Hanna-Barbera it was hard. And Bob Go helped me, and Volas helped me, and a lot of people were instrumental. In fact, in the beginning, Bill Kyle was really tough on me, and he used to we used to call them underwater ballets, the hard scenes, and he would give me those hard scenes, and oh my God, it would, he'd say, well, if you're an animator, you can do it, and oh Jesus,
What show was that?
It was the Smurfs.
Oh yeah, okay.
No, not the Smurfs. Eventually he sent me over to Radford to be an animator, and I had 2 assistants, and we had to animate all the hard stuff that came back from Spain in those days, and it was on Ghost something. Ghost, a lot of superhuman stuff.
Yeah, I think that's still up on Cartoon Network.
Yeah, all that stuff. So because we had Radford facility, I was an animator. We were in with the checkers, and the ink and paint service was there, and the camera service was there. So I would have to animate it. The girls would assist, and they would ink and paint it. They would check it. They would shoot it, and then it would go back to Bill Kyle.
Oh, okay.
I had to do it right the first time. I didn't have time to nuance it. I couldn't see it on a moviola. I couldn't do anything. I just had to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I had to take it home and do it, and the special effects and all the things that were hard to do from overseas, I had to do. And I may have not done it before. But because I had a lot of help, and because I was just stubborn enough to do it, and that was the best thing he could ever have done for me, was to give me that hard assignment and those hard underwater scenes, as we call them.
Yeah.
And when I went back to the studio, he was an absolute lamb, and he helped me, and he'd say, okay, this is good, but do if you did this. And Jay Sarber too, they would look at the animation and say, now that's okay, that'll work, but do this. So after I sort of cracked that wall, then I was accepted, and I was taught, and I appreciated it. And that's what my experience with him.
And you stayed with animation for about 6 years until all that went overseas, right?
Yeah, and then of course, yeah, and that was.
And then you moved on to timing directing
Timing.
and slugging directing and
Yeah.
things like that. Of the shows that you've worked on from the beginning of your career till now, which ones stand out? Do you have a number of favorites that you say, wow, my job on that was great, the product was great? Do you have any that are your pet favorites? I guess that's what I'm asking you.
I think the Smurfs were fun when I animated on the Smurfs.
Mm-hmm,
That was the beginning of kind of the pride, because the Flintstones were just kind of limited, even though a lot of those were fun. When I directed and produced on the Flintstone Christmas Carol.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good show. I was proud of that. At Disney, I think lately, Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True. That was good, and the Fox and Hounds 2.
So you've sort of come back full circle to Disney features.
Yeah, Hufflepuff movie was fun.
Yeah.
That was a sweet story. Again, the story of that was really sweet, and it was better before a lot of it was changed. The beginning product from the end product, but the end product is still. I'm proud of that one.
Yeah.
And
now you were directing on those, right?
Yeah. Well, I was timing.
It's directing.
Yeah. At Disney now, I'm on 7D, and it's a cute show. I love it. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, which one of your children do you love best?
Yeah.
You know, I feel kind of a personal involvement, I think, with everything that I do.
Yeah.
And each one is different, and each one has its. Right now, there's a lot to remember.
Yeah. So, would you recommend for women to come into animation at this point? I mean, because it's been a real roller coaster ride for you over all the years that you've done it. And if you were talking to some 22-year-old female artist, what would you tell her?
If you want to pursue it, and your doors are open.
Unlike when you started, there were a lot fewer doors that were open.
Yeah, and when I was at Hanna-Barbera and people would come in with portfolios, and it was when everything was going overseas, it would be difficult to see a young person, male or female, to say get into this business, because it's a very difficult business.
Yeah.
And it's very competitive, and there's always bullshit that you have to put up with, but you just kind of have to be smart in what you do and you say, and how you work, and work ethic. Sometimes I see the work ethic that is non-existent.
Yeah.
And it really makes you angry, because there's a love of the product, and when you see people just kind of goofing off all the time, it makes you mad. When you could make it better.
Yeah.
And if anybody is really interested in becoming an animator, whether what degree, in what department, if you love it and if you do it, it's a great career.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for all those years, and that I can retire, and maybe
someday.
No.
When you reach the right age.
But it's a love affair with a business. And if you have it, and with any business, and if you have the talent and you have the guts to put up with it and do it, you can
Move right
Make it.
along.
make it.
And if you hadn't gotten on that bus
At that bus.
back in 1954, what do you think you would have been doing? Or you can't even imagine what you would have been doing.
It's so, yeah. Probably I would have been a teacher. And in those days, actually, I had planned to be a nurse originally.
Mm-hmm.
In high school, I had taken a lot of science courses and had a lot of science and had, you know,
Yeah.
that would have been, I probably would have been a nurse, but I sure wouldn't have had the fun I have had and have had the stories I can tell
Yeah.
about all the people running into Walt literally in the hallway at Disney when I was running back to the studio. That's another story.
Yeah,
but-
tell me about that.
Well, women could not be in the animation building. You just couldn't go in there even.
Right.
And of course, because I wanted to go see Tony, I would sneak in and go up and see Tony in art props, but carried away with conversation, I would be late, and you couldn't be late in those days, so I was just running like crazy down the hall, and Walt and Jack Webb
Yeah.
and the big guy
Yeah.
came around the corner. You know how it was those corners in the studio.
Rounded,
there,
yeah. I remember.
And I was literally running like crazy, and I hit. What was the big guy's name?
You're talking about Big Roy?
No, that was with Jack Webb.
I don't remember the guy. He was I think a sidekick on the show, but I
Yeah,
can't
he was the
remember his name.
sidekick on Dragnet.
On Dragnet.
And I hit him. Thank God I didn't hit Walt, or I really would have been fired. But everybody just kind of, you know, and I was called up on the carpet, man, and I was almost fired.
Really? What did they do? It was shortly thereafter. Did they laugh when you hit him, or did they just?
No, they were shocked. I mean, I think Walt was probably mad, but I mean, I don't really remember. I just remember, I mean, I just still boogied right on out. I mean, once I hit him, and he didn't fall down, fortunately. I mean, or because if I had hit Jack Webb, he might have.
Right.
But
He was a big guy, so
He was
he
a
stayed
big
on
guy,
his feet.
so
You
he-
must have hit him hard.
I did. I was running down the hall, and so I just composed. I mean, I just kept going, and of course, it was just 15 minutes later, and I was called into Grace Bailey. Was that her name?
Yeah, I think it was.
In the office, and
She was your supervisor?
yeah.
And what did she say to you?
I have no idea, but except I understood what she said to me, and I didn't.
Which was, don't do that again.
So Tony would come down and visit me at break time in our tea room, which was
The tea room.
Interesting.
I remember the tea room.
yeah.
So-
Anyway, many stories. Those stories I would not have had I become a nurse or a teacher. But then I'd have more stories to tell.
And you would have had other stories about tending to patients and all that stuff. Well, this has been great. Do you want to name what I usually do at the end of these things? And maybe I should stop because it's getting to be rote. But of the top of everything that you've worked on, or has had an impact on you, even if you didn't work on it in animation, what are the top 5 shows and or features that have really made an impression on you and are your proudest achievements working on? You mentioned the Smurfs, and I know you inked on Lady and the Tramp, and what would be 3 or 4 others that stick out in the course of your career?
Sleeping Beauty.
Well, now that must have been an incredible challenge to ink.
Oh, yeah,
given
those,
the scope of that and the design of the characters.
the cells, because I inked on some of the horses that came through, and the cells were this,
Huge.
this long.
Technorama 70.
And it took forever, and we had a crescent shape wood with holes in it held all the colors that we worked on, and we used
Had a lot of different colored inks.
colored inks, and it was a horrendous job. Proud of those things when you see them, but we can't. How animation is such a chain of people that I don't think of what I did in this show. It's such a group effort, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, that's trite, but look what they're doing now with the computers, like Frozen.
Right.
I saw that recently.
Right.
Beautiful film. Beautiful. Tangled was a beautiful film.
Yeah.
But as far as what I've worked on, I think the direct-to-videos were probably the best because we had more time, and as time and budget make a better product.
Yeah.
But some of the funny things that I worked on, like the J. Ward productions, and
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Rocky and
Fractured Fairy Tales.
Bullwinkle, right? Peabody. That's
Peabody and Sherman.
Sherman.
Mr. Peabody
Movie
and Sherman.
this week. Worked on that. Beanie and Cecil, the original. Those funny shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm proud of those too, but it was totally different.
Yeah.
In comparison, from the J. Ward productions, which were hysterical, to now to Frozen, which is absolutely incredibly beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good. It's a good business. I would encourage anybody, if they wanted to, if they could. It is absolutely great. I'm very grateful for it. I'm grateful that I've been a part of it. And I'm grateful that I've seen it through all these different changes and have worked in just about every department except camera.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's good.
And it's been interesting and enjoyable.
Yeah. Besides that, it pays pretty good too.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we will end.